Hi there. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Over the last 7 years in a sales role at multiple tech companies, I've realized that sales is a definite passion of mine. And over the last 4 years at Databricks, I've come to realize that technical sales is where I continue to see myself growing my career. During the presentation, I'll introduce myself, how I landed in the space, and how I've come to realize that just sharing this journey is a catalyst for getting more people, especially women, to understand the opportunity that tech sales has to offer. Let's jump into it. Today I'll be running through why tech sales in the first place, which shouldn't be too hard of a sell considering our audience here today. An introduction of myself, my background, how I made it into sales, and each step I took along the way. I'll wrap it up with a summary of my recommendations, which I think can be applied to any role, whatever career path you're on, and then we'll finish with some Q&A. The goal of the presentation is for you to learn how I made it to where I am today and hopefully apply some of my recommendations to your own career path. So to jump into why technical sales. So we're seeing that the market opportunity within cloud and AI is growing rapidly. So already a $40 billion market today and growing 40% year on year. And it's projected to be $730 billion by just 2027. So what that means fundamentally is that the market's going to need a lot more salespeople. The ability to collaborate with customers is one of my favorite parts of the job, and it gets me super excited to wake up in the morning. And for example, we're working with customers like Regeneron, who use Databricks to sequence many different scenarios, specifically to help speed up the drug discovery life cycle for drugs like the coronavirus vaccine. So really impactful things we're working on with our customers. And as we're seeing a lot more companies invest and be directed by data, we're seeing that many more customers are coming to us to work with us and partner with us on providing this very critical business value. And as the market's growing, I'm seeing that it's just providing more and more paths to career acceleration and development. But the best part is that happens both within a professional network as well as the personal level as well. And I'm sure we're all aware here that I love that tech really can provide a pathway to being played with, both from a professional, but you can also have your side projects that you really enjoy. And as we've seen, it's super hard to keep up as technology is continuously on the move. It's super fast paced, but exciting as well. And so I love that every day presents a new learning experience. And as we're seeing the market actually grow, what we know is that means that engineering is getting much more the majority of the budgets today. And what that means is that salespeople are closing larger and larger deals with their customers because they're able to actually capture more budget. And so the upside in compensation is definitely there. And I know it might be a little taboo to talk about money, but I don't think that a lot of people realize that with working with customers on these very business critical use cases do come the big budgets associated with that as well. Quick introduction of myself. So as I'm sure you can tell from the slide, I am a twin sister, and she is actually back in San Francisco and works for a similar tech company called Zendesk, which some of you may or may not be familiar with. But I hail from San Diego, California, which looks awfully similar to Sydney, as you can see from the picture here. And what happened was that I went to college at the University of Southern California, which is in Los Angeles. I graduated with a BA in business administration. And if I'm going to be totally honest, I didn't even know what tech was. I was not familiar with Google. Well, I was familiar with using Google, but I didn't know the extent of the company it was. I wasn't familiar with HP or any of these, Oracle, any of these classic enterprise technology companies. The only tech company that was really front and center when I did graduate was Apple, which created the iPhone, which I used, and iPod, and all of these other actual hardware products that I used in my day to day. And so I actually graduated not really knowing the opportunity or what tech sales really meant. And so my sister and I both graduated from USC together, and she already had a job offer at PwC, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, in San Francisco. And so I took the leap of faith to move with her without a job offer, and really go find a job in San Francisco. And so I actually had one fellow USC graduate who was a recruiter reach out to me, and she's the one that pushed me to interview for tech sales and introduced it to me in the first place. I thought it was very risky to have some of your compensation associated with, to be variable in the first place. And that was something that I wasn't really familiar with, coming from a town where, we mostly focused on, in San Diego, mostly focused on careers in real estate or biotech, as well as small businesses. And so I just really wasn't familiar with the industry itself and the types of career and career paths you could have in the industry. To break down the journey, I landed in San Francisco in 2013, and it took me about 3 months to get the job as a sales development rep. And I'm sure you've all had experience with salespeople, whether it's getting these annoying emails or phone calls. That was basically my job. But what made me really good at it was that I loved the opportunity at researching about the company. Why was there a reason for me to reach out in the first place? Could I tie my outreach back to a personal blog post, or, for example, a talk like I'm giving today, to make it so that, one, the conversation is worth having and relevant, and two, by standing out and being memorable, you're able to get that response in the first place. And this company that I was working at was, I would say, not your classic technical tech sales. I actually was selling to CFOs. And that gave me so much knowledge, and I really appreciate my time at this company. But selling to CFOs is definitely difficult, and I'm sure all of you are aware of how tough they are when it comes to getting budget approval. So once I was doing the sales development rep job very well, I actually asked my manager at the time, where could I see my path within the company? And, he told me to be patient. So I worked with my account executive, who I was making all the cold calls for, around understanding what path did he take and what did he think my next role should be within the company. He had provided recommendations for me around, you need to find a way to practice selling in a very non-risky environment in order to master just the process well, and figure out what that process looks like. And then once you figure out that process, you will be able to execute in a more competitive environment. And so what I pitched to my manager was to focus on customer expansion. So to only sell to our current customers. And what that did for me was that it gave me the experience to understand all of the internal mechanisms that need to happen in order to do a sales process in its entirety, to get that signature. But also it allowed me to not be worried that I would potentially be losing to the competition just due to my novice, to the fact that I was unable or still new to actually executing sales in the first place. And so it was good for me because I was able to identify gaps and areas that I needed to work on and not think that it was just because of the competition. So in 2015, I was actually promoted to the new business account executive, where I actually did really well. And I totally believe that this was due to the fact that I was able to practice the sales process prior to actually jumping into a competitive situation. And I think that with that, I was able to be extremely successful. I made over 3 figures within my first year of graduating college, and was, just very continuously successful after that. However, the company I was at was not in the tech space, but also there wasn't really a further path up. And so what I recognized was that at that point in time, even when I would say I was at my height in execution, I was able to recognize that making a jump into the industry where I felt like I would be able to grow my career better, that would teach me the skills that I would use for years and years to come, was worth the investment in what might be, and you can see in the arrows, I've actually demonstrated it here, a drop in both the amount of money I was making, but also I would have to kind of go back to ground zero and learn the tool I'm selling, the platform I'm selling from scratch, which I was really good at in my last company. I could take the sales process and that rigor with me, but I would really need to take the time to learn how to execute selling a new technical solution. And this is coming from a girl who didn't even know what open source software was. I didn't even know what all of these communities we have today around meetups and Slack channels for open source software. I didn't even have a clue what that was. So I would say the learning curve was quite extreme. But I ended up joining a little company called Databricks, where at the time we were 130 employees, and I was one of the first 20 salespeople. And I took it upon myself to really dig in and learn the tech and just be able to identify the gaps I had and work on them to then ensure that I was able to execute well. And so after, from 2016, I joined in August 2016. So about a year and a little bit later, I then was promoted to an enterprise account executive. And again, a year later, I am now in Sydney, Australia as the senior manager of the sales team here, and have moved to Sydney, Australia with my company. To give you a little bit of a trajectory there, I think the opportunities that I've had to move up was because I was executing well, but outside of that, the company was also expanding really rapidly, which opened up these opportunities. So Databricks, when I started, was 130 employees. At around 2018, I would say we were about 400. Right now, we're 1,600 employees globally. So because of that accelerated growth, that also opened opportunities for me to then accelerate my career along the way as well. What I've taken from my journey along the way is a couple of key bullet points around my recommendations on how you approach your career, how you ensure that you're executing well, but also how you're able to identify the promotion opportunities and make sure that you're confident in asking for those. So my suggestion is that you really focus on consistency and execution, and then you can move on to mastery. The consistency and execution is really important. And I think that in sales, it's really nice because we're measured completely on metrics. And so it's really obvious to point out when you're executing well. In other roles, I would suggest setting benchmarks or creating metrics for yourself, obviously agreed upon by your manager and maybe your manager's manager. So then you know when you've hit that point of mastery, and then can confidently go and ask for that promotion. I've also found that coachability is a really key point in being successful. The reason why is what I mentioned earlier, is that the space is moving so fast. You need to be flexible and move quickly with it as well. And what that requires is coachability and flexibility and changing how you're accomplishing your day-to-day tasks. You also need to be the one to put things in motion and do not expect things to come to you. During my time at Databricks, I actually was the one that put all of my promotions into motion. So when I went from commercial account executive, when I started at Databricks, to an enterprise account executive, I was the one that was meeting and building the relationships with the enterprise sales manager prior to even having that opportunity to ask for it. Because if it's someone that's hiring that they're familiar with, both on a personal level, and then you bring the metrics with that personality, you'll find that that is a much easier ask than if you're coming to these managers as a brand new face. It's kind of hard to differentiate yourself from someone externally at that point. I always love to lean on my team. So network internally and cross-functionally. I know especially during COVID times when we're all remote, it's so hard to talk to other people outside of your specific team that you meet with day in and day out. But I would really recommend that you reach outside, build those relationships, and kind of create your go team, who will then be your internal cheerleaders. I think even right now, it's just so important to have people to lean on that will take any, Slack message, phone call very seriously, and know that they're there for you. So I think that it's about making sure that other people will be rooting for you when you're not in the room. I love that the space itself is, again, continuously moving. So always be open to learning. Also, provide opportunities to teach others about, what you're doing as well. And we all know that this space moves fast. So I would highly recommend that. Practice resilience. I think this one is key, especially during COVID times. From a startup, I don't know if everyone here has worked in a startup, but I can tell you it is not smooth sailing all the time. We're seeing definitely some ebbs and flows. And so what I would say is that you need to make sure that you practice resilience, in that you know what to expect. First of all, you set your expectations properly. And I wouldn't say it's the same thing as grit. It's really about listening to a no and knowing that it's one more step closer to a yes. And my final recommendation is to be all in and demonstrate teamwork and collaboration and helping everyone succeed. Because if you help everyone else around you succeed, you will find that you will be much more satisfied when other people succeed if you're having a rough day. I always look at things as, a collective effort. And when I see one of my team members or one of my other teammates across the globe succeeding, that provides me with serious satisfaction. And I think ultimately that just leads to a better work environment. So in closing, I did want to end things with a quote from Michelle Obama, her recent podcast. So I'm just going to read it here quickly because I want to make sure I get it right. So her podcast was with Valerie Jarrett, who is her mentor, and actually really gave me confidence to speak here today and sharing this story, and just to have the conversation in the first place. So I'll go ahead and read the quote. So, maybe you started your job a couple months before the newest hire. Maybe there's someone in the grade behind you who's looking for support. Maybe there's a kid growing up down the street who just likes the way you carry yourself. No matter who it is, where it is, or what it is, you have an opportunity and responsibility to make those kinds of connections. And if you find yourself looking for someone to learn from and lean on, My advice is to take the first step in introducing yourself to the folks around you. Ask them for a coffee or set up a virtual meeting and ask them whatever questions you have on your mind. Do whatever you need, but just make sure you do it, because once you start a conversation, there's no telling where it might end up. And to wrap things up, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the She Builds event today. Thank you for joining my session. I hope you took some nuggets away from it with you, and I'd love to open it up for questions or comments. Thank you.